In this video, I'm going to show you how to use explicit intents. So when we look at intents, if we go to the developer.android.com, you can see that an intent is a messaging object that you can use to request an action from another app component. Although intents facilitate communication between components in several ways, there are three fundamental use cases. We can start an activity, which we're going to do today. We can start a service, and you can deliver a broadcast. So the different intent types that you can get is explicit and implicit intent. So for this video, we're going to look at explicit intents. They specify the component to start by name, the fully qualified class name. You'll typically use an explicit intent to start a component in your own app because you know the class name of the activity or the service that you want to start. For example, start a new activity in response to a user action, or start a service to download a file in the background. Okay, so we're going to have a look at explicit intents, which basically means we're going to send messages through in our own application to start a new activity, sending through some data and so forth. So for our layout, we're just going to change the layout there to, and this is a new project, but I'm going to change the layout there to a linear layout. And then when you're using a linear layout, you must remember the orientation property. So it's going to be Android orientation, and we're going to use vertical. And then I'm going to remove the text view that we currently have there. So we got a blank layout. So what I want to do is just add a quick button at the top. So we're going to click this button to see how we can start or launch a new activity. And then I'm going to also have, let me just go to the text fields. We're just going to have a text field then underneath that one with a button again. So what we're going to do is, if we click the top button, it's going to go to a new activity. And then the next part that we're going to do is to type something in this text field. And then when we click on this button, it will show it in that new activity. Okay, so for this button, let's just move this component a bit down. So I'm going to use the margin top property and move it down, let's say 40 dp. Okay, just to make a nice space in between. So for these components, let's add a layout margin for that one also, a left one of 30 and a right one of 30. So we have it a bit smaller. Okay, and then for that button, we add a top margin of 10. Okay, so now the text, let's just go to our resources folder and go to values and strings, and let's just add some text for those buttons. So we're going to say string name equals btn, let's just call it launch, and we're going to say launch activity, to launch a new activity that we're going to create now. And then we're also going to have btn, and the other one's going to be send data. So we're also going to launch that one, but we're going to send through some data. Send data. Okay, and then the hint maybe for that edit text that we've got there. So we're going to say hint, let's say data that you want to pass through, and we're going to say please enter your name, for instance. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and then when we go back to the XML, the text on that button, double click and then use the three dots, and we're going to use btn launch. So it's just going to say launch activity. The hint property there you'll find on the right hand side, so go down to the hint property. There's the hint property. Click on the three dots, and we're going to use hint data. So it says please enter your name, and then for this one double click again, and we're going to use btn send data. Okay, and then for that one we can go to the gravity property and center it horizontally. So it looks like that. So we're going to click this button to launch a new activity. Click this button to whatever the guy typed here, send that through to the other activity. Okay, so the launch activity, for this one we need a method, for this one we need a method, so when it gets clicked something will happen, but for this one we only need an ID. So I'm going to double click that one and say the ID there will be, because it's an edit text, I'm going to start off with ET, and I'm going to call that one ET name. So it's the edit text, ET name. So if we go to the main activity now to set up everything, let's set up the edit text quickly. So we're going to say edit text, et name, and then go into the onCreate, and let's just set it up. Et name equals casting it to the correct one, edit text. Find the view by its ID, and the ID that we just created there was called et name. So now our et name encoding has got a connection to the edit text there. Okay, so we've got a connection to the edit text. Let's just create those two buttons methods. So it's public void. I'm going to call the one btn launch, and then in brackets view v, and that view that will be clicked will actually be the button. Alt enter for your import. So it's btn launch, the one, and the other one will be public void btn, let's say send data. Going to view v again. Okay, so now we can connect these two methods to those two buttons. So click on the button, and then you're going to search for the onClick property, and then choose from the drop down box there, the combo box there, choose this one is going to be the launch method that must be launched, and that one should be send data. So now they are connected to those two methods, and you can see it's not grayed out anymore. Okay, so the next part will then be to create our new activity that we want to launch. So I'm going to go into my Java folder, the one that says com.whatever your application folder is, the one that does not say Android test. So you're going to right click there and say new. In this case, we're just going to create a new activity. So I'm going to say new activity, and I'm going to go with an empty activity. And for this empty activity, I'm going to call this empty activity, let's call it the data activity, and then just say finish. Okay, so you can see we've got a second activity there, and under layout there's the second activity also. Okay, so if we quickly go to the manifest file, you can see that a second activity has now been created. So we've got one activity tag there, and then there's the second activity tag, the one that we just created. So very important about this first activity tag is you can see that it's got a category of type launcher, which means that this one in this activity tag is the activity that will actually be launched. Whereas this one there has got no intent filter with it. This is just a normal activity. So this activity that's got launcher there, the category of launcher is the one that will actually launch when the application is created or when the application runs. Okay, so now the next part that we need to do is to actually launch this new activity. So I'm going to go back to main activity, and now in order to launch this, and this is where explicit intents comes from, we need to explicitly launch that intent or that specific activity. So in order to create or launch a new activity, we need to use an intent object. So I'm going to say intent, and I can call it whatever I want. I'm going to just call it intent equals new intent. And then in order to launch a new activity, the first argument must be your context. In this case, it will be our main activity. So we can just pass in this, or you could pass in main activity.this, doesn't matter. And then for the second argument, you need to indicate the specific one that you want to launch. So in our case, it's called data.java. So we can just say data.class in this case, and that basically means we're going to launch data.class. Now, a better way to do this, if you go to your manifest, or not your manifest, if you look at the top of your package, you can see your package name there. Of your main activity class, you've got your package name. So if I copy that, it would be better for me to add my package name there as well and put the dot to actually call this data class. So this means now that if there's another application on this phone with the exact same name, data.class, I'm not accidentally calling that one. I'm making sure that I'm calling my own one with my own package name. Okay, but for most cases, you can just use data.class. Okay, and then how do you start the activity? You just go and say start activity and then pass in that intent. So if we launch our application now, if you click the button, you will see that it actually launches the new data activity. But on the data activity, there's basically nothing at this stage. So let's quickly go to activity data, which is basically just an empty activity again. There we go. Still relative layouts. I'm going to go back to text and also change that one to a linear layout. Also adding the Android orientation property. And also setting it to vertical. And you can even see there the context is that specific data one, com dot and the whole project. Okay, so there's the empty one. And what we want to do is to just add a small, I'm just going to add a medium text there. So there's the medium text, and I'm going to set the, let's set the text there. So we're going to go to strings XML and then set the text for that one as text data. And we're just going to say something like data will be added here and put 3 dots. Okay. So when we go back to the activity data, we can double click that one and set the text quickly to that, what did we call it, text data. So it will just show data will be added here. So if you run it now, you will see that the activity will just, when you click on the button there in the main activity, this one, if you click on that first button, it will actually come to this activity and you can see data will be added here. So we're going to test the application when we're done with both buttons. Okay, so the second button, let's say we don't only want to launch the activity, but we want to also send through some data. And the data that we want to send through is the data that the user will type in the edit text. So it will be the data from this text field there, or the edit text. So we first need to get whatever the user typed and then activate the new activity and send through the data. So what we need to do in that button, when the guy, or in this method, when the guy clicks the button, we need to first get the data there and then launch the new activity. So we're going to say, let's say string name equals, and that text field or edit text is called etName, and we're going to call the getText method and then just call the toString method to get it as a string. So we've got whatever the user typed. So now we want to send that through to the next activity. So I'm going to create an intent again, the same thing again, equals new intent. Again, main activity.this, like the one at the top, exactly the same thing. And again, we're going to copy, or we're going to use that specific one. So we're going to call data.class. Okay. Now we're going to also call start activity, passing the intent. But now just before we start the activity, so you can see both of them are exactly the same. But just before we start the activity, we're going to add some extra data to this specific intent. And that's going to be intent.putExtra. And you can see there's a putExtra method. And the putExtra method basically accepts a key value pair, where the key will basically be the name of your data and the value will be the data itself. So I'm going to name my value, or my key. I'm going to name my key name, and then the second argument will be the data itself, which will reside in this specific variable. So maybe let us just not call it the exact same thing. Let's call it data. Okay, so the data will be the name of the data that we're passing through, and the data that we're actually passing through will be name. So it's a key value pair. That's the key. This one is the value. And when we get to the other activity, we can just go and retrieve the key, and it will return the value for me. So what we're doing now, if we click on that button now, if we click on this button, it will take whatever the user typed there and then launch the new activity, passing that data with it. Okay, so now at the other activity, this data.java, you remember that we've added this one there. It's just a normal text view, so I'm going to double click there and give it an ID. I'm going to say TV data. So now when we go to this one again, let's set up, so we're going to say text view, TV data, and you can just use Alt Enter for the import there. And then we can go and say TV data equals text view, find the view by its ID, r.id.tvData. So now we made a connection to that TV data, and now we can go and set the text that was passed through from the previous activity to that one. So then we're going to go and say, in order to get that name, so I'm going to get that name again that I passed through. Remember, we passed through the name here by using put extra. So in order to get it this side, we need to call getIntent, which will get the intent that activated this class. Which intent activated this class? This intent that we set up there. Okay, and that intent has got some data with it. So we're going to say getIntent dot, and because we used the put extra method there to place a string value in it, we need to go and say getIntent dot get string extra to return a specific string. And then you can see it needs the name. So which one is the name? It's the first one that we indicated there, basically the key, and it will return the value. So in this case, we're going to indicate data there. So we want to retrieve that piece of data that was passed through, that's called data, and that data will be returned. Okay, so it will return the name then, and now we can set that name. So we can say tvdata.setText, and we can set that name to the text field. Okay, so that's basically it for explicit intents part 1. So in the main activity, when the guy clicks on launch activity, it will just launch data without setting the text view. So the text view will just stay, data will be added here. But if the guy clicks on the second one, and after typing something there, he clicks on the second button, it's also going to go to data.java, which will be this one, but it's going to set the text on that one, depending on what the guy typed in this edit text. The last thing that I want to quickly do here is when the user then clicks on this activity, or the first button, it only launches the activity. It doesn't send through data. So when we get to this part and we get the intent, we try to get the intent, it will actually pass in a null value. So we can go and test there. If that name is equal to null, it means that we did not send through any data. And then the else part is if we actually send through data. Okay, so basically we want to still call this set name or set text. So we're going to say if it's null, we're just going to set the text to data will be added here. So we're just going to say there data will be added here. But if we get to actually getting the data from there, we can set the data to the data that was passed through, just to make sure that both of them works nicely. Okay, so let's run the app and see how it works. So when we launch the application, you can see that if you click on the first button, launch activity, it will just show data will be added here. Now if we enter some text and we click on the second button, it shows the text. I can change the text there to anything else, let's say Peter, and click on send data again. It sends the data through via the intent to the next activity, but that one, the first button, will basically just show data will be added here.